program, welcome. And during the season of Lent, as we are soon to be entering Holy Week, we wanted to take this opportunity to think about our Matthew 25 ministry and journey as we enter this new year. It's hard to believe that it's been almost a year for many of us since we have been since many of us have been under stay-at-home orders, or our travel has been restricted by the COVID-19 virus. And even as we see a light at the end of the tunnel, we know that there are still many who are suffering, and that we are still there's still much to do before we are able to gather again in person. We are grateful for each and every one of you to be with us for this program as we seek to more deeply engage in the Matthew 25 invitation. I am the moderator for today's educational event, and I'm Bryce Weeby, the Director of Special Offerings in the Presbyterian Giving Catalog. As you join together with us today, just a couple of reminders. If you would keep yourselves on mute, that would help the day go smoothly. And if you are welcome to keep your cameras on, but if you keep your comments and questions in the chat, we will be monitoring that and be able to relay some of those questions at the end of the event, especially. We have limited time and many exciting presenters, and so we just wanted to move right along into our program. As we welcome you, we wanted to thank our staff consultants on this program: Andrew King Bartlett of the Presbyterian Hunger Program, Margaret Mwali of the Presbyterian Committee on the Self-Development of People, both of whom you will hear from at the end of today's program, and the Reverend Carlton Johnson of Vital Congregations within the Theology, Formation, and Evangelism Ministry area. And now to begin our engagement, we want to invite the Reverend Dr. Diane Givens-Moffat, the Executive Director and President of the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and the Reverend Carlton Johnson, who is the coordinator now for Vital Congregations within the Presbyterian Mission Agency, to begin our program, begin our engagement on this very important topic of housing. So for the both of you, you have both served local congregations in many contexts. And so you've seen this issue crop up in different ways, in different places. Can you help shape our understanding and help us see how the Matthew 25 invitation and these focus areas really help us to engage and see more clearly those impacted by a lack of affordable and safe housing?
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this gathering. Thank you, Bryce, for your leadership, and Carlton, it's good to be with all of you. And I thank God for God's presence and pray God's presence and blessing upon this time together as we talk about issues that are certainly front and center with the ministry of Jesus Christ, who said that he came to declare good news to the poor, recovery of sight to the blind, release to the captives, to set the liberty those who are oppressed free. So with that in mind, I am going back now a little bit and putting on my pastor's hat. I served in the last congregation for 13 years in Greensboro and North Carolina. Congregational vitality, one of the things that we would do is we would go out into the community, knock door to door, and just simply say, we're the church down the street and just wondering how you're doing. And is there is there anything that we can help, or any way that we can help you with anything, what's on your mind? Since we're neighbors, let's be friends. We did an exegetical kind of work around about 5 or 10 block radius. So congregational vitality means that you're getting out. We already have plenty of programs that we did for the community and so forth and so on. But one of the things that really came to mind was, particularly with the Medicaid expansion or lack of, where there were a lot of people who did not have homes, who were living from couch to couch, and if not from couch to couch, literally putting up tents and living in various parts of the city. And we wanted to be able to reach out to them, to connect with them, and to see how we could be in service to them. And so one of the first things we did was to make sure that we had an ambassador to come. And what I mean by that, we made friends with a person who knew who the leader was in their community. And we found out that a lot of times people needed to just know where a meal is. So in Greensboro, we called it a green book, and people would serve meals to help people who were dealing with issues of poverty, not doing much advocacy on it, but just poverty, just trying to relieve the poverty. And we found out that Sunday was a day where there was no hot meal. And not only do people need meals, but they need healthy meals, because what we found out, it was a diabetic, it was mostly Black, Indigenous people of color, a lot of Black men, by the way, because there's not a lot of services for Black men, but Black families. So what we did is we kind of set up a wraparound service. I was on the board of the local, actually regional hospital. We're in three cities, and the doctors came and we set up just a whole big piece. And what we found is that people would come to us, they needed a healthy meal. They would let their community know. First of all, when you open your doors and you say we have a meal, they don't know you. So people who don't have maybe the economic means, you can't assume that you're just going to open up the door and say, we have a free meal. They don't know you. so we had to develop those relationships so that the people would come and know who their leaders are. And then we would get from them what health topics that they were dealing with. And we found a lot of people had co-occurring issues. They had diabetes, for example, and then they also maybe were addicted to a substance, or they had different things that were happening, some mental issues. So we brought together wraparound services with the county, with the doctors, and we found that housing was extremely important, and that was an issue because a lot of people needed Section 8 and the list was long, and you cannot really help to mitigate a disease and give people medicine if they don't have a refrigerator, if you don't have a place to keep things and what have you. So that's when we found out how impactful affordable housing needed to be. And that's when we began to advocate and to work with city government. And then that spilled over into my mayoral race. I ended up running for mayor, and trying to get housing, because we didn't want to put new housing in just a particular area, because then you don't get a mixed community.
Right.
But we would also run into people with zoning who said, we don't want those kind of people in our area. Right. So housing and all of that, racism and all that was an intersection, and we were dealing with it on both, the one-on-one level, but also the government level, really advocating for policies that help people.
Well, Carlton, let's bring you into the conversation. You've been serving in and out of Atlanta primarily, and as Diane remarked, there are many individual components and intersecting issues that put someone that someone experiencing homelessness or in need of affordable housing might experience. Your experience in Atlanta, share a little bit about what the root causes of the issues around housing tend to be from your vantage point.
Thank you, Bryce. Very much so, like what Reverend Dr. Moffett shared, our services in our congregation were of the wraparound sort. In a nutshell, it's hard to get resources to people if they don't have a mailing address. So one of our starting places was we were their mailing address, sometimes the drop-off pickup place for some of those resources. But it comes with the realization of, just this whole history of redlining, and how even though the area where our church is in Lithonia is one of the richest Black enclaves in America, but specifically in that part of Georgia, the history of redlining ensured that even that rich enclave received fewer resources, while the county right next to ours was actually receiving subsidies to ensure that they have the better schools. And of course, we know where there are better schools, people pay to buy better homes, and when they pay to get better homes, the tax base increases, and then there are more services. So just adjacent to us were more services and resources, but we were in this enclave where, though a rich county, still had people in need. So we provided, or rather we still do provide services to them in a way that they can access them. And being more than just the church as a place of worship, but literally attempting to respond to the needs of the people according to how Jesus talked to us in Matthew 25.
Right, and in each case, many congregations are engaged with communities experiencing poverty and supporting wraparound services, as both of you indicate. What we've seen, I think, interesting to the housing conversation, there was a white flight, a redlining, as you indicate, sort of movement. Now there's been sort of, with gentrification, almost a reversal where city centers have become packed again, and those experiencing poverty are often pushed further out of services and into communities that either once were wealthy or very adjacent to ones that currently have a lot of capital and wealth.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes, yes.
Oh, no, it's okay.
No, you.
Yeah, so right here in Louisville, I'm on the board of the Louisville Urban League. Sazika Reynolds is, oh gosh, doing a fantastic job leading that organization. And that's already, when you talk about starting to invest money back in a depressed area, what happens is the people that own property in that area, they get a little bit concerned because the value will go up. And so though they have owned this house free and clear, they might not have the money to pay the new tax rate on this home now. And so now there's a new tax rate, and energy is happening in the area, but now I've got to be pushed out. So that's what happens with gentrification. So I think when we do develop policies around investment and people coming in, we've got to make sure that the community is at the table to mitigate against that kind of thing, because that is typical of every urban area. So I'm seeing the kind of the beginning or the concern about that, even as a sports complex has been put up in West Louisville and other areas. Wherever you see gentrification, that's what's happening. Oftentimes people are losing their homes because they cannot pay the taxes, or somebody comes along, a developer comes along and says, I'll give you, $100,000 for your house. And they don't realize that in a year or two, that same property is going to be 3 or 4 times worth that. So there's no sense of what the city is projecting in terms of its development. So we're giving away property and again, being really exploited. And this happens to a lot of people of color in gentrification. I don't know if you were going to, Carlton, you had something you were going to say too.
No, oddly enough, I literally, in my young age, at a younger time in my life, was literally victimized in that same way. A home my parents bought in the 60s for literally $19,000. In the late 80s, I sold for $80,000. Today, that exact same home is worth over $300,000. So, the folks that were up to what they were up to came to a young 26-year-old kid. I just told my age to everybody at that point, but at any rate, came to a very young kid whose parents were dying or deceased with lots of money. And so I needed it, and thus became my outcome. But also, what happens, and I'd like to use a little more of the idea of what happens when all of this all these wonderful buildings and sports complexes come in. The sports complex comes in and builds this awesome facility, and yet charges prices where the people that live close by will never be able to go in. And they do the work of not necessarily hiring those folks, and or if they do, at less than living wage. So these are constant ways that the cycles of poverty and the cycles of poor housing are regenerated over and over again.
Well, I'm so grateful to the two of you for sharing both personal stories of ministry, but also Carlton sharing a personal story of the predatory practices, especially on people who are young and are ill prepared to be making some types of financial decisions, and it's so easy to be manipulated in those processes. I think it's a great jumping off point to join our three. We have 3 presenters joining us from congregations throughout the PCUSA. Mary Jo, if you could jump on our next slide here, we will. Do we have a quick break? Do we have a 1-minute break? I think right here.
Yeah, there was some questions in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to take them, but they asked about how do you mitigate against gentrification. And I think one of the things that we're doing in Kentucky and Louisville is we're making sure that there is an awareness of what's happening so that there's a sensitivity to mitigate against trying to get people's taxes raised up. And then you can also provide grants to people so that they can actually help build up their property instead of, trying to get them out of it. So there's different ways when you become aware of it. When we talk about wraparound services for co-occurring things, wraparound services means that you come to one place or one church and you deal with your mental illness, you'll deal with the food issue, you'll deal with different areas so that you don't have to go different places to get the services that you need, because oftentimes people who are on the edge don't have that kind of time or the resources to go from here to here to here. So you make one place where people can get those things dealt with.
Right. Thank you so much, Diane, for keeping me in the chat there and into those questions. Keep those questions coming. We will be breaking into the conversation with all of our presenters for today. But right now, as we're going to thank our first two presenters, and we're going to take a quick breath and recenter ourselves as we then move into the next conversation with three church leaders from throughout the church. Mary Jo. We are so grateful for our next three presenters, and I'm also grateful for these questions. Keep them coming in the chat. We're now joined by the Reverend John Brown, pastor of Old Bergen Church in Jersey City, New Jersey, the Reverend Jake Metcalf at First Presbyterian Church of Hayward in the Castro Valley of California, the Reverend Brian Hamilton of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. Unable to join us is the Reverend Ruth Hamilton, also of Westminster, and the Reverend Patrick O'Connor of the First Church of Jamaica, Queens. Welcome to the three of you, and I want to go ahead and give each of you an opportunity to share with us a little bit about the beginning, the genesis of your work engaging with housing. And Jake, I wonder if we might begin with you.
Sure, great to be with you all. Just a quick heads up, I'm doing virtual learning in multiple spaces here in California. So any child might fly into the background at any moment with some kind of question about math that I won't be able to answer. That all being said, I think the genesis for us around housing really just kind of emerged from what the Reverend Diane Moffett was saying, from this is what's happening in our neighborhood. Like, we're in the Bay Area, we're experiencing a housing crisis at a rapid level. I mean, the Alameda County, which is where I'm at, point in time count, lets us know that for every person we get housed, 2 more are becoming homeless. That's the current state of affairs where we are. I think on a systemic level, that's where we began. And then on a personal level, our faith community sits right here at the corner of 2 kind of major thoroughfares. We're a half mile from a BART station, which is our kind of light rapid transit here. So we are in the center of a lot of things. And there was one night I think specifically for me, from a Holy Spirit driven place where I was here late working on a sermon, and a brother walked to the door about the same age as myself. It was a cold, rainy Northern California night. We get those here. It's really like bone chilling. And he came to the door looking for a blanket. And I, scoured the building, found a blanket, and then kind of gave it to him. And he walked out into this cold night, like past the lights that were right underneath the overhang. So I couldn't see him anymore. And I looked around at our gym. I looked around at our parking lot. I looked around at our sanctuary. I looked around at our spaces, and really just felt convicted that we've got to do better than this. Like, we have so much resource here in our buildings, in our land, in our spaces. So went to our elders, went to our congregation, started dreaming and brainstorming, and that was 4 years ago now. And so we sit here today. Our gym is full for 6 months of the year. It looks like it's about to become year round. We do an emergency shelter for 50 to 75 people every night in our gym. We're doing a resource center during the day, Monday through Friday, from 8 to 5 to help those same folks find housing. We've put 6 tiny homes on our parking lot. We took out 14 parking spaces and put 6 tiny homes there. Since then, we also launched Firm Foundation Community Housing, which is doing the multiplication of tiny homes for other faith communities. Especially a lot of us in Presbyterian, PCUSA land are land rich, but cash poor. So we've kind of created a system that allows for churches to put tiny homes on their land without having, to pay for it all. So we're doing a lot of that stuff. I mean, the genesis really began back at, I think we're also up to, and I'll say this, I've learned a couple of things, and then I'll pass the mic. But one, I've just come to the place when a Matthew 25, theology, that housing is a human right. We treat it like a commodity. It really is not. It's a human right. Every single one of God's children deserves to have a roof over their head by right, not by cash flow, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. And then if we don't do something, really having lived this for the last 5 years, if you don't provide someone a house, if we don't do that work as the faith community, we really are condemning people to die on the streets. It is almost impossible to get over your meth addiction, those are folks on those spectrum. There's a lot of our homeless folks who are working, but the health issues that you amass on the streets, the hunger issues, the mental health issues, the drug issues that amass on the living on the streets, so without a home, it's really impossible in a lot of ways to get through those. And so if we're not going to engage that work, people are going to die. God's children are going to die if we don't use our spaces well, our resources well. That's kind of our story, where we're at in a overly simplified way.
Hey, great. I think there are some specific questions in the chat. If you wouldn't mind looking at a few of those as we turn to Pastor Brian Hamilton, if you would join us from the other side of the country, but a similar situation where, housing stock, there were pressures on, and a lot of things going on in the area. Tell us how your congregation got started in this ministry.
Well, Westminster in DC is a relatively small neighborhood congregation. It's 168 years old. It is located in an area of called near Southwest DC, near the tidal basin. It's only about 10 blocks from the National Capitol building, and it always was a small neighborhood, predominantly white congregation. My wife Ruth and I are co-pastors. We have been in place in this congregation for 25 years, so we've got a generational perspective, I guess, on this. Part of the problem in our particular community as it relates to housing had to do with national policy and the configuration of housing in the capital city here. After the Second World War, when the federal government organized the Department of Housing and Urban Development, one of their first agendas was to fix the urban blight near the Capitol, near the National Mall. And in doing so, Ultimately, what they did was they razed a whole neighborhood. I mean, they knocked it to the ground. I'm talking about a community that's probably 20 blocks square. There were 36,000 people who occupied this community. For different historical reasons, the neighborhood, the housing stock in the community was very blighted. And as a matter of fact, when they started demolition in the late 50s, a majority of the housing units in this neighborhood did not have indoor plumbing. And this is just a stone's throw from the US Capitol. And so the federal government just couldn't let that stand. So they used eminent domain. They drove everyone out, including our church from its prior location. There were probably 36 churches in the community at that time. Most of them left. Our congregation, thank God, decided to stay. And they purchased a new parcel of land in one of the most prime areas of the community. So what urban renewal did in Washington, D.C. and in Southwest was that it displaced 2 out of 3 residents. That 36,000 population dissolved to 12,000. And that came along with all the promises that HUD and urban renewal always made over the years, you know, but displacement is the issue. And at the same time, DC is gentrifying at an incredibly rapid rate, like so many other cities. And so now, like Jake was saying, we are brick rich and cash poor. And the way that we kind of look at it is that we're sitting on a gold mine in terms of land value. And that's way too much equity to let just sit in the soil. So as far as our approach to housing is concerned, we, you know, these forces and these factors are just weighing on everyone. Low income, middle income, upper income people are all stressed in our local economy, but particularly the low income folk. So what HUD did at the end of it, for some of those 12,000 who remained in the community, was to build 3 HUD-owned public housing projects that have probably a third, anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the population of our community. In our community, fortunately, churches and the whole community as a whole have made an extremely strong commitment to no more displacement. No more displacement. As a matter of fact, there is another strategy that is in the conversation, and that is build first, which means that for the Department of Housing, they cannot demolish a unit in our community unless they have a new one to go into. Now, this is a very ambitious agenda that the city council and the mayor have embraced and supported, and we'll see if it holds, because it's going to be extremely expensive to do that. But what we did was we realized we had all this equity. We watched 3 other mainline denominational churches go through redevelopment, where essentially they would find a development partner and they would sell them their land, and in exchange for a new building and maybe a small endowment, a small amount of cash, they would take that land and they build it out to a maximal degree, and it was all theirs. We went out and pursued some bids from some development partners and found one that a team of developers. There were 2 of them in that team. One of them focused on building affordable housing, and so they offered us the opportunity to be co-owners of 123 units of all affordable senior housing from 30 to 60% median income. And so it was just a tremendous opportunity for us, as we're not getting any cash out of this deal, but In the long term, the congregation will have the opportunity to own this apartment building. So it's tremendous, tremendous opportunity. But the housing, the justice issue is, the cost of construction is just astronomical in a lot of northeastern US cities, and I'm sure elsewhere in the country as well. I mean, we're spending well north of $600 a square foot. If that means anything, that's exorbitantly high. And so it's been a tremendous opportunity for us. We're going to get a new church that's 2.5 times larger than what we have now, and own an equity stake in this new affordable housing.
Oh, that's quite the journey, from policy all the way to you mentioned in our conversation this is about a 10-year process, and we'll come back with a few questions, but I wanted to turn the conversation to a non-property related response. The Reverend John Brown, if you would join us now, share a little bit about Old Bergen's engagement on the topic of housing as a bedroom community right outside of New York City.
Thank you, Bryce. Yes, to begin with, let me provide some context. As Bryce mentioned, Jersey City is a bedroom community of New York City located just across the Hudson River from Manhattan. It's an 11-minute train ride from my neighborhood to the World Trade Center. Now, this church, Old Bergen Church, has been in this neighborhood for 360 years. Obviously, that's before the American Revolution. And I've been pastor here for 10 years. Many of my members and our neighbors commute to work in New York City. So with that in mind, real estate and housing is a huge issue for us. Our city actually has some quite good laws on the books regarding housing, landlord-tenant rights. The problem is, for decades, those laws have not been enforced. As church leaders and clergy, we heard stories and asked questions among our members and neighbors. We learned that not only were there cases of neglect, but there were actually predatory landlords targeting our city with the purpose of setting up false affordable housing for huge tax benefits, and then intimidating and pushing out tenants in order to escalate the rent on those apartments. In fact, we saw loan documents which included a formula for rent escalation to qualify for the mortgages to buy the apartment buildings, with a formula for the rents to go up year after year after year. But everyone felt helpless to do anything. So we organized, starting with a handful of clergy who just wanted ecumenical and interfaith collegial support. We realized we needed to work together if we were to address the problems that faced our members and our communities. So following 2 years of conversations, listening sessions, and coalition building, we launched an interfaith community action group that we called Jersey City Together. The initial launch of that group was held at my church with 850 participants from 20 faith communities. And 2 years later, we have 1,100 leaders from 30 faith communities and 4 non-religious agencies. And a core team of those interested in tenant rights, we got to work. We held a door-to-door canvassing in apartment buildings near my congregation, and we learned that in just 6 buildings, there were over 750 violations of building codes. Things like flooding, to infestations, to black mold, to blocked fire escapes, lack of heating and hot water. And the purpose, time and time again, was to drive out current tenants and then to hike up the rents for new tenants. All 6 buildings that we canvassed were owned by the same property management landlord. We invited the mayor and city council to tour those buildings, and we held press conferences. The city council and mayor were shocked, embarrassed, and outraged. And as a result, the mayor restructured the Department of Building and Housing, replaced some staff, and even created a new position of city prosecutor who would proactively pursue complaints of intimidation and harassment. Then, with the help of a grant from Self-Development of People, we set up a tenants support group, distributing flyers, holding workshops on tenant rights, retaining low-cost legal counsel, and making a commitment to stand by in solidarity with our neighbors. I remember one woman by the name of Monica who helped hand out flyers in her building. The next week, the landlord installed a security camera right outside her apartment door to monitor her actions for the purpose of intimidation. 1 week later, she returned home from work to find an eviction notice on her door. She was falsely charged with late and overdue rental payments, when in fact the landlord held on to her checks so that they wouldn't clear and claimed that she had not made payment. We obtained a lawyer and promised to stand with her. On the day of her court hearing, 6 of us accompanied her. She was physically shaking and said she almost backed down, but she went there because of our support and stood before the judge and presented the case, to which the judge responded, "This is clearly not a case of late payment, but of intimidation and harassment. Case dismissed." Monica broke into tears and thanked a handful of people who had supported her. And ever since, she's been one of our strongest advocates for tenant rights. One of the lasting results is that the landlord who owned those 6 buildings with the 750 violations and also owned 59 other properties in Jersey City under 5 different LLCs, he concluded that the city was no longer being run by the Wild West, and he sold his properties and left town. But we couldn't do that as individuals. We had to join together. And that's what's important in addressing all these things, is to work together with others in the community.
Talk a little bit about that. Some of the questions in the chat have come up around gentrification, and I would love to hear from all 3 of you about the posture of your congregations and how it's shifted as you've engaged these topics, but also how it's given life in relationship to, all 3 of you found these ministries in the relationships you had with your community. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can lift up. But it's also, so important that we share what it does for the congregations themselves and how it shapes your relationship to the community, but also with one another. So if you could each give us a sense of how it's impacted your congregation and its relationship to the community.
I guess I could start. I guess one of the things that we did early on in early 2000s is that we started an affiliate, a nonprofit organization, which is kind of a mission affiliate of the church. And we did that to facilitate fundraising and liability control, because our small congregation did not have the funds or the resources to do some of the ministry that we wanted to do. One of the first things that we did was we created a jazz venue. And we started doing a Friday night jazz night program, 3 hours of live straight ahead jazz with a fish fry dinner. And anybody who knows about that understands that, fried fish on Friday is a deep African-American tradition. And we made a commitment to jazz, which is also another strong commitment made in the African-American community. And so the jazz community found us in a way. And as a result of that, many more people found us, and many more people who became active members. And a really deep, rich conversation on anti-racism broke out, on community development, that broke out. And so these questions and concerns about power, ownership within the community, they're in the air, they're floating around. And now we're trying to figure out, how can we be more effective? How can we have deeper impact? And so that's always in the mix when it comes to our conversation about housing. It's always embedded in a justice conversation and an anti-racism conversation. And we all understand that we are, because the economy is so stressful for everybody, we all understand that we're kind of in this together.
Thank you so much. Jake, how about for you out in Castro Valley?
Yeah, I think everything, a lot like what Brian was saying, begins relationally. Um, as you form authentic relationships, then the concerns of your friends become the concerns of yours. The concerns of people you love become the concerns of yours. So as we started doing this work, we would, our congregation would get involved relationally with people who were staying in their cars in our parking lot. We did a safe car parking for those that have been evicted for a while, and did some of the, not nearly at the same level as Reverend Brown, but did some of the work of just, every case is its own story. So you're advocating in a different way for each individual person with them along the way. As that happened, it just really humanized the housing issue. So our congregation, I think personally, pastorally, engaged where Jesus would have us engage. And in so doing, came to life spiritually. And all of a sudden, our understanding of our faith life together is missional, right? Like, we're here for this together, and it drives energy and spirit-filledness in worship. It drives energy and spirit-filledness in community groups. It drives energy in the workplace. It drives all the kind of combined intersectionality and justice issues of folks who are working in corporate real estate all of a sudden view that differently. Their impacts are different because it's going to affect Patricia, who's staying in a tiny home on our property, right? And since you start putting names to these different places, so I think from a congregational vitality standpoint, overly simplified, and I think that everybody more than likely would agree that once you turn outward in figuring out what your community is experiencing and how we enter into that pain and solidarity and become effectively a part of it, there's something that happens like this, like it's in the scripture. It's a mystery. You can't put your finger on it how. It's not math, put in missional, get out, spirit-filledness, but like it happens, right? Like, and so our congregation is more alive, I think, than they've ever been. I remember there's we've been through a transition like everyone, but like there's this really amazing 84-year-old woman, and we went through a lot of transitions. So a lot of our older folks have moved on to a space that's more traditional and not multicultural and multilingual, and she wasn't one of them. And so she grabbed me. She was about 4'8", and she grabbed me by the shirt one day and says, "Hey, I'm still here, And I said, "Yes, I'm very thankful for that, Joanne. We love you here. You want to know why I'm here?" And she's kind of getting her finger in my face. It's because finally we're walking the walk we're meant to do. I don't like the music. I don't particularly like the Spanish, but at least we're walking the walk that we're meant to do. So I'm here for the long haul, right? And so since then, she's become a lot of, grown a lot in those other spaces as well. But I think in that regard, she's come alive, and a lot of our folks have too.
Amen. I know it's one of the central practices of the Vital Congregation's curriculum of the PCUSA that many congregations and mid-councils are engaging. That outward incarnational focus is a deep part of our identity. How about you, Pastor Brown? Have you seen the impacts of your congregation on this work, based in this work?
Yes, well, thanks again. Certainly, I think working in solidarity and struggling with our neighbors on common interests makes not only the wider community, but our own faith community stronger. Seeing 850 people fill our church sanctuary was inspiring. Our folks thought that would never, ever happen in their lifetime. And the thought that they are not all registered members of Old Bergen Church, it widened their view of what the community of faith was all about, who we are as a community and who we are as a people together. And also as a result of working together on these citywide issues, it brought us into closer trust with our Catholic and Jewish and Muslim and Episcopal, Methodist, Baptist neighbors, to where then we decided to start a summer children's peace camp using curriculum from the peacemaking program, building a neighborhood together by the makers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And with the exception of last year, the previous 3 years, every summer, our church hosts a children's summer peace camp that is truly communal in nature and interfaith, and hoping to raise another generation of people who care about their city and their neighborhood, their community. And all this increases the self-esteem of our members and their faith in what a difference our congregation can make.
I'm so grateful to all three of you and to your congregations for the difference you all are making on this very important topic. You know, there are many ways to engage, and as you've seen, there are ways that you can go deep. But we also have some ways that every congregation can engage in this important ministry. And as you heard at the beginning, from being a part of networks for wraparound services for those experiencing homelessness, to working to change rules and laws, or collaborating with community organizations to help reduce the impacts or eliminate the impacts of gentrification. These are all important sort of first steps that you can engage. I want to thank all three of these presenters. They're going to stay on with us. We will have some more time for questions at the end. And you can, again, go into the chat and ask your questions. And all three of our pastor presenters today will be engaging in that area, along with members of the mission agency staff and others. So we are grateful for your questions and for your engagement. Mary Jo is going to take us into another space to breathe out of gratitude for these three congregations and all the congregations of the PCUSA actively engaged in Matthew 25 ministries. Let us indeed build a house where all might freely live. We are grateful for each of our presenters so far, and grateful for all of you for sticking with us. We want to now bring us into a moment of making the connections. As you heard from Reverend John Brown's story, the Presbyterian Committee on the Self-Development of People was an important part of their work in their community on the topic of housing. And so joining us today are two staff members from the Mission Agency with deep engagement in this topic, but also connections throughout the country in helping congregations work with impacted communities on a whole host of topics. So Margaret Mwale, who's the Associate for Community Development and Constituent Relations with the Presbyterian Committee of Self-Development of People, is with us. And Andrew King Bartlett, who is Associate for the National Hunger Concerns, which oversees a pot of money through One Great Hour of Sharing that is dedicated to our denomination's response to the topic of homelessness and the issue of affordable housing. I want to invite the two of you to come on screen now, to unmute yourselves and to talk a little bit about what you know through your work with impacted communities on the topic of housing. From what you've heard from these congregations and what you know from those impacted, what are the things that you think congregations should really come to understand about this topic?
So one of the things, as Pastor John Brown mentioned, was the connection that was made between self-development of people and his church. And that is one of the things I think that is really tantamount to the conversation, is an awareness of what are we doing within our congregations and what are other parts of the Presbyterian Church USA that are engaged in this work as well. So for instance, through the connection that he was able to make self-development of people start with Jersey City Together, we were able to actually make a grant to a project called Tenants Protection and Rights. And this is, as was shared, a faith-based community organizing group. These are tenants that are seeking to empower themselves and their fellow tenants to know their rights and to confront predatory landlords. And in particular, the grant that they received from Self-Development of People was for the purpose of further identifying and developing leadership among tenants in Jersey City that could advocate further for their housing needs. So that is one way I think is really having a sense of what is happening in the different parts of the Presbyterian Church USA, because there's great work that is going on in terms of housing justice work. And the other thing that I also would encourage people to do, and I think we heard a bit about this, is educate yourself around what's happening with regard to homelessness and affordable housing in your city and state. Apart from learning what the statistics are, actually seek to engage with persons that are experiencing homelessness and or they lack affordable housing, so that you get to know their personal stories, and they're no longer just statistics, but they're real people. And that impacts on how we are going to seek to engage with those people in future and to join them in advocating for housing justice. And some of your existing ministry partners might be helpful in this regard. This actually also makes me think of a project that came to us through the Twin Cities Area Presbytery Self-Development of People Committee, a project called Defend Glendale and Public Housing Coalition in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And these are grassroots residents that have organized to present the issues that they have pertaining to their housing projects seeking to be purchased by developers. And so they are trying to avoid gentrification, which we heard about a bit earlier. So when they found out that their residences were going to be demolished, they started organizing. And so their objective is to ensure zero displacements and to eliminate systemic gentrification, and also to build more public housing and minimize racial and economic inequities that are facing Minneapolis County. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on another really great project that through Self-Development of People, the church has been able to come alongside. And this is called City Roots Community Land Trust in Rochester, New York. It's a community-based organization that seeks to ensure community stewardship of land for its residents to ensure that there is long-term housing affordability. So what the project does is to provide affordable home ownership opportunities to low-income home buyers that are earning under 50% of the area median income. They purchase homes that need to be rehabilitated. And so the SDOP grant funds were used to purchase needed materials for volunteers in the neighborhood to complete the rehabbing of the home. And then once the home is rehabbed, the home is sold at affordable rates to low-income qualifying buyers. And they agree to pay it forward, meaning that with this approach, the initial buyer purchases a home at a subsidized price and then passes on the value of that subsidy onto the next low-income homeowner at the time of the resale. And so that ensures that there's permanent affordability of the property. And with this particular project, also just to touch on the intersection of eradicating systemic poverty and dismantling racism as part of the Matthew 25 foci, this project seeks economic and racial equity by mandating that the majority of the board members and the membership are actually persons of color and low income. And so they promote justice and build stronger communities through their commitment to building strong relationships and tackling systemic issues that have been identified by the community. In particular, in Rochester, New York, permanently affordable housing is desperately needed because of the history of structural racism there, concentrated poverty, and the trend towards renting over homeowners. And so City Roots seeks to reverse this history of disinvestment and redlining which we heard a bit about earlier, by creating permanently affordable housing. So I'll stop there, Bryce.
Yeah, thank you so much, Margaret. A rich resource, and city land trusts, as in the chat, you can find out more about that particular project. Land trusts are an important way, as we see runaway increases in land prices, to help perpetual affordability, as Margaret has shared. Andrew, can you talk to us a little bit about the work of the Hunger Program related to community organizing and some of the core principles that you look for when looking for sustainable initiatives that develop affordable housing?
Sure, and good afternoon to everyone. It's good to be with you all. As you may know, the Hunger Program is about addressing hunger, but especially about getting at those systemic drivers of hunger and poverty. And so I think we're all challenged by the Matthew 25 initiative, and just wanted to back up a little and, think about, as our goal is to eradicate systemic poverty, we know we must be thinking in systems, thinking about systems level. And for me, there are three important questions that I popped into the chat, but I think these questions can help us discern how to go about affecting systemic change. So what is the nature of the system? What are the current conditions within the system? And what are the forces that have the interest and capability of making real change? So as we've heard from these many examples and our presenters today, the nature of housing is that it is driven by profit. And like all our other wealth, housing wealth is accumulating into the hands of the rich. Equitable housing access has been impeded by racist and discriminatory policies over decades. So low income, Black, Indigenous, and households of color are more likely to be severely burdened by housing costs and to live in poor quality housing with increased exposure to environmental hazards. The current conditions are such that the financial fallout from COVID-19 is fracturing an already stressed housing system. And we as Presbyterians, as Christians that care about justice, we must work to create housing solutions that center equity, combat displacement, and ensure environmental justice. So now, what are the forces that can affect such change at a scale that makes a difference? We've heard a little bit in the chat about this, but one such force is congregation-based community organizing. And we've heard about that from John Brown as well. Short name CBCOs. So New Jersey Together is a congregation-based community organizing group that also has non-faith group members that comprise the coalition. And they are part of the Industrial Areas Foundation, one of the 4 major CBCO networks in the country. And you've heard how effective New Jersey Together has been. So decades ago, the General Assembly determined that CBCO work on affordable housing would be the most effective way to combat homelessness. So 4% of the OGHS offering is devoted to this purpose of funding CBCO grants and training. The Presbyterian CBCO program is run by the Hunger Program, and we provide right now about $100,000 annually in grants to these coalitions around the US. A few are startup CBCOs, but almost all of them are working on affordable housing. And PHP is one of the top funders of CBCOs in the US. So as we've heard, these coalitions are made up of congregations from Christian faiths as well as from many other faiths, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, and other nonprofit groups as well. And they are intergenerational, diverse, and highly effective in getting government to invest in affordable housing. So in Richmond, Virginia, the CBCO there is called Richmonders Involved to Strengthen Our Communities. And they recently succeeded in getting the mayor to allocate $6 million from the city's CARES Act allocation to emergency rental assistance. In DC, the Washington Interfaith Network, WIN, they just had their groundbreaking in 2020 for Temple Courts with 504 affordable housing units out of 750, along with another 149 affordable housing units at Spring Road, highly Black populated areas of DC. So previous victories that they've had made this possible by increasing the 3 major housing funds to at least $300 million per year. New York Avenue Presbyterian Church is part of the WIN coalition. And these coalitions can affect change in other major ways as well. WIN, along with their allies, impacted the DC budget recently to increase investment in housing priorities to the tune of $150 million. Now, this included an investment of $88 million for the Housing Preservation Fund, $25 million for public housing repairs, and nearly $9 million for homelessness services. So Presbyterian churches around the country have joined these CBCO coalitions to address the systems that perpetuate poverty and homelessness. These are living examples of Matthew 25 in action, and your congregation may be able to join in this work. If your city has a CBCO, you can join it. And if not, you can support CBCOs around the country by donating to the Presbyterian Hunger Program and One Great Hour of Sharing. So just in closing, with that little summary of what CBCOs are doing, I think it is especially critical, especially for a predominantly white church, as white people, that we learn this history that has shaped both land and housing in our country. As we've heard, the housing system has been deeply shaped by white supremacy and discriminatory practices. And yet the particular expressions of this in each area may be unique. So we begin by asking good questions. Like, what are the particular features in your area? How is housing affected by race, immigration status, class, and so on? Has your congregation or its members benefited or lost or changed as a result of this history? And finally, we can learn more about how the doctrine of discovery and redlining may have played into our particular histories. And each of us, including myself, must have the courage to continue to ask questions that may be inconvenient or uncomfortable. And generally, we must get used to just being uncomfortable as we dismantle racism and systemic poverty. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We are running short on time, but I did want to be able to ask at least a couple of questions and allow all of our presenters the opportunity to perhaps respond. I think there's a particularly important question in the chat because it pertains to so many Presbyterian congregations. One of our attendees has asked, how does a small church, even one as small as 21 members, find their way into these conversations in a means and in ministries that feel effective, that feel life-giving in the way that you all have described? I see Brian has unmuted as a small congregation church leader. You can go ahead.
Absolutely. You know, this is a tremendous opportunity. I'm a big advocate of church-based community organizing. And you know, as Presbyterian, I think we all understand we're in the relationship business. And doing that in your community, getting outside of your walls, to have those kinds of conversations with folk in your community who share or don't share whatever values we're bringing to the table. It's extremely important to be asset focused as opposed to scarcity focused. We got to start with what we have as opposed to what we don't have. And whatever you can do, have a party, you know, just have a carnival, do whatever you can do just to bring people together. Start those conversations, build those relationships, make sure you communicate to everybody who lives around you that you're as concerned with the real life lived on our neighborhood streets as anybody else.
Thank you so much. Yeah, found it in relationship. It's something that's come over and over and over again. And I would share a small story of a small congregation in northern Indiana who, it wasn't on the topic of homelessness, but with a membership of only 12, was able to impact the young people who had experienced the loss of parents from the opioid crisis, because they trusted in their neighbors' expertise and they trusted in building coalitions. So they built a response, not with just the 12 members of their congregation, but with 71 community organizations, even in a rural area. Margaret, your hand is up.
Yeah, sure. Something else that comes to mind is engaging with people experiencing homelessness could take the form, for example, of your congregation, your small congregation even, exploring the option of partnering with an organization like Family Promise. It's a national movement that seeks to end family homelessness. And so, for instance, the congregation I once worked in had a lot of unused space. And we heard a bit about that earlier, that's certainly an asset. And so they were able to actually convert that temporary sleeping space for families at certain times of the year. And then at other times of the year, those families were housed by other congregations that were also part of the network of churches that had partnered to provide temporary housing. So that's a pretty, I think, straightforward and simple way of getting involved in that work initially, at least.
I would also, if I have Bryce, we have time. I don't want to take too much time.
Go ahead. Yep.
I think one of the most impactful things that we're not a huge congregation. I think we're probably in the middle in terms of PCUSA kind of understanding of that. I would advocate for, no matter what size your congregation is, we've had pretty powerful conversations with local city leaders, or local, if you're in a rural area, unincorporated county leaders. We just asked them the question, like, hey, we want you as our city leaders to be elected officials, to be really excited that we're here, like really excited that this church is in your community. Just tell us, what have we done to help you get to that place? I think congregations of any size can step right into the roles that your city leaders and city officials already, like the other folks, and oftentimes those visions are the same. I don't think there's particularly a lot. I mean, we get to the solutions different ways, and I think the racism is present and the justice issues are ever present, but a lot of times your city officials also want to end homelessness. They want to make your community safer. We want to do this work together, and they come with resources. Like right now, I think it's a little wild. Like we'll probably have in worship, I don't know, 125 people to 150 people. But now we've got 85 people on staff because Alameda County gives us $1.8 million to do shelter work, right? To do work that there was a gap in. Our city governments have funds to fill these gaps that nobody's filling. So if a faith community wants to fill it, they also can pay you for it. And that helps everything. And I mean, their requirement is going to be you have to serve people of different faiths and you can't proselytize as you're serving. Like, okay, we're here for the relationships anyway. We want to love people. That's fine. The reasons for the hope we have will emerge in relationship. We're not worried about making sure you know Jesus as you come in the door. And you can work with people that way. Like, we're really scared of these partnerships, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great word. And Carlton Johnson, Reverend Carlton Johnson, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we'll bring in Diane to sum up and do some next steps. And thank you all again for your wonderful presentation, for your emphasis on relationships, for looking for leaders within the community that are already active, and learning the history of your congregations to really understand how you've been a part of the story of your communities. Carlton?
Thank you, Bryce. I often like to quote the words of Dr. Ober Hendricks from his book, The Politics of Jesus, that suggests that we treat the needs of the people as holy. Treat the needs of the people as holy, not necessarily our property or our book of order or our book of confessions, but that we treat the needs of the people as holy. Which oftentimes when we look outward, as this pandemic has opened the doors of the church, that we're not necessarily always looking to invite people in, but they were inviting ourselves out. Congregational vitality is about how do you interact with others, not necessarily how do you draw them into you. So that as we look to the days ahead of how we show up as more vital and how we look into these matters of dealing with shelter, primary concern for Jesus, that we go to other communities, other congregations, and then we go to talk to people and treat their needs as holy. Thank you so much, Bryce.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. Diane, we want to bring you back. Thank you again for this wonderful program. What an amazing group. So we've gone through questions. Mary Jo, you want to jump to our next steps as we invite Diane to unmute herself and join us again.
So thank you to all of our panelists. I have been to Castro Valley to see what Jake is doing, and some others, Jake, John, all of you, Brian, all of you. I'm not calling all of your names, but Margaret, all of you that have shared today, we have benefited by it. And I'm grateful for those of you who hung on with us and you're still there. So a few next steps on your Matthew 25 journey. I'd like for you to make sure that you sign on to the Matthew 25 invitation if you have not already. It is life-giving, and it is the work of the gospel. You know, it centers those who are on the margins. And when we're doing that work, we're often counted among the least of these, because you're going up against bureaucracies and agencies, and you'll end up being in prison, and you'll end up, being sick. You'll end up suffering some of the same things. So we need to count ourselves among them and know that this is the work that we have been called to do. And we do that out of our relationship with Jesus, because we've had an encounter with him, and he has changed our lives, and he has helped us to see that we are one human family. So please, the best method to embed this vision in our church is to share it with others, and go to our website, sign up if you have not done already, talk with your session or whoever's in charge of your entity, make sure that they're with you, and just go and register, because sometimes you're doing the work and you've decided, and if you don't sign up, then we won't know. So go to the website and do that. Look for organizing groups in your local area that are addressing housing issues. You cannot do this by yourself. This is about partnership. It's about community development. It is about relationships that we are building with people in and around the church and even beyond. If you want more ideas of how to put an operationalize Matthew 25, join the Matthew 25 Facebook group. That group is there. They're sharing stories when people get stuck or they have issues, whether it's housing, whether it's racism, whether it's vitality, all of those ideas that intersect, we talk about them in that particular Facebook. And then, as you've heard, when you give to the One Great Hour of Sharing, this helps us to be able to help others to make the difference, to make the kingdom, God's principles, God's teachings, as they're revealed in Christ, to make it a reality. The largest of the 4 special offering ministries, of course, is the One Great Hour of Sharing, and it's coming up. Please make sure your congregation engages that offering. Let them know it helps with housing and hunger and all kinds of disasters that people are suffering. And when everybody does their part together, we see a big change. So please make sure that you do that. Many congregations receive One Great Hour of Sharing during the upcoming weeks. But also sometimes they're just around the clock, just around the calendar. So please make sure that you do that. And you can share this giving slide with your members, right? This giving slide that's up. We have slides for you. We have videos for you. You don't have to do it all. We are here to serve you. You are those who are doing the work. We are the agency, the mission agency. So we want to be with you and to learn from you, to grow with you. And we want this church to grow. We want the kingdom to grow, or the kingdom to grow. We want the principles of Christ to be alive in this world. And if you give yourself away, if your congregation, no matter how small, gets involved, you'll find that life will come. And it's something about the integrity of the walk that will just be life-giving. So let's move out. We were never meant to just serve ourselves. We are in service to God and to God's people. So thank you for all that you're doing. And I won't see you before Easter. So Holy Week is coming up. A joyous, blessed, meaningful Holy Week, especially in light of the tragedies that we have faced.
And now we'll bring in the Reverend Rosemary Mitchell, who is the Senior Director of Mission Engagement and Support and my boss, to tell us about a few of the upcoming programs and to close us in prayer.
Thank you, Bryce, and thank you, Diane. As you all can see, we are very blessed with an incredibly gifted, inspiring leader in Diane Moffett, and we are grateful for her leadership. The next Matthew 25 program will be Wednesday, June 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, and the topic will be on hunger. Our whole series during 2021 is on engaging in Matthew 25. Next slide, Mary Jo. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you especially to the speakers. Wow, you folks are fabulous. Thank you each. And thank you to the pastors especially. After today's program, each person who registered will receive a recording of the program, a link to resources on housing, a link to Matthew 25 resources. So we will include resources that were mentioned in the chat. So you will get the whole package within a couple days. Your mission engagement advisor for your region will also send you a link to Matthew 25 resources and also be available if you have questions or want to do some specific follow-up. Our speakers today have all agreed to allow us to give you their email addresses, and so we will include that in the resources for personal contact. Thank you all. Have a blessed Holy Week, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Please join with me in prayer. Dear God of each of us and all of us, we are grateful for a God of love. We know that all people of all races and are created in the same beautiful divine image of God. The truth set forth for us in the Bible is that God is love, and that hatred has no part of God or any part of our life in Christ. It is with sadness this week that we reach out and pray for those women, the Asian women murdered in Atlanta, and those who were murdered in the grocery store while doing a daily activity in Colorado. We mourn and grieve for those who are victims of racism, violence, and injustice. Be with each of us and all of us as we are in our separate places and go our separate ways. May all that we do be for the building up of the body of Christ. Amen. Go in peace, friends.
Bye-bye.